Welcome to Uncommon Ground. I'm Talal Yassine. In today's episode, I speak to one of the most influential figures in modern Australian politics, Mr. Bob Carr. Bob served as Premier of New South Wales for over a decade, the longest continuously serving Premier in the state's history, and later as Australia's Foreign Minister. He has since held titles and portfolios in the corporate landscape, but above all else, Bob remains a thinker. He's deeply curious, intellectually restless, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. I've known Bob for over 30 years now, and I trust that you'll enjoy this conversation that takes you beyond the headlines, the press conferences and the spin, and gives you a true insight into a remarkable man, a leader and a stoic. Let's dive in. Well, thank you, Bob, for joining me today on Uncommon Ground.
Pleasure, Talal. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, I think we've known each other for a very long time. We can talk for hours about any one of the things we want to talk about. And some of the things that are going on in the world today, things that we can't miss. But I'm also very interested in the fascinating story you have about the uncommon ground that Bob Carr has covered. I grew up reading about you, knowing as I got a bit older and got involved in politics, meeting you, then becoming engaged with you on various things. And now we're involved in charity together and have several things that we've got in common. And it's always fascinated me how people have misunderstood you, as I have got to know you personally over more than 30 years. But I want to go back to the early days of Bob Carr and ask you a question about what was your first childhood memory? When you first came to the world, what do you first remember?
Gee, I think a backyard in a suburban house in Maroubra. Just a sprawling backyard that had once hosted a tennis court. Backing onto a lane, and there's the back of a cinema and a bakery with horse-drawn bakers' vans that would go around the suburban streets. But it was just the untidy backyard with a mangy dog running around, a clothesline and a laundry with an old-fashioned copper in it. The essence of post-war suburban Australia.
And you went to Maroubra Public School?
Yes.
Tell me about that a bit.
I remember the first day. I was proud I didn't break down in tears like others in the class. I remember the smell of the Globite school bag, the smell of a banana for play lunch, of a Sayo biscuit, a corned beef sandwich, and then my anxiety that when we had to learn running writing, it'd be too hard. It'd be too hard for me. So maybe I was a somewhat anxious kid. Maybe that's part of my personality. Driving me on, an anxiety driving me on to do things. Fear of failure.
Indeed. And so you finished in Maroubra Public School, went to high school, Maroubra High?
No, I went to Matraville High School. I was in the first year that went through it, so it was a classic new release area high school. I was conscious that with these brand new textbooks and a new library, that I had a great opportunity. I was excited by the idea of learning, and I liked the library. The curriculum was appalling, just bad. I mean, for someone like me with no aptitude to spend time on technical drawing, metalwork and woodwork was just a travesty. And I understand kids who dropped out because they couldn't keep up with the academic subjects because they had no aptitude for that. And there was nothing really to capture their interest in school. God, it's a much better curriculum today. That's something I got involved in as Premier. But I was introduced by one good teacher to the concept of self-improvement through reading. Doris Allen, my English teacher for 3 years, left me with one message, and that is, one should always be reading.
Wow. And obviously that carried on throughout your life, knowing you, an avid reader.
Yeah, it sparked something, and for that, much gratitude. But it doesn't disguise the fact that for the most part, my teachers in senior high school were undermotivated, not excited by the subject they were teaching. They could never be accused of going the extra distance to capture the interest of a class. And it wasn't that I was academically gifted. I think there were times when all the youngsters in the class, some who were never going to finish all the years of high school, were just bored by the under-challenging teaching.
Yeah, and probably the lack of interest in it, it talks volumes, especially in my experience, even subjects I like history. Right. If the teacher wasn't engaged, wasn't excited about it, you'd lose interest very quickly.
Indeed.
Yeah. So when you got to year 10, 11, 12, trying to think about matriculating, and you ended up in politics, of course. But was there something else you wanted to do? What was the plan?
No, I at 15, I decided I wanted to be a professional politician.
At 15?
At 15. And the question was, what would I do until I got into Parliament and I was drawn to journalism?
And so did you finish up and then go and study journalism, I would imagine?
No, but my first job was with the ABC when I left university with an honours degree in history. And I got a few notions then, running around the city with a tape recorder, interviewing politicians, pursuing the story of the day, about how words can work, how you can use words on the broadcast medium and ultimately in print. And I was to work for 5 years at the Bulletin magazine, which in itself was a great education and a very sound preparation for being Premier.
I've heard you say that before, Bob, which is very interesting. Can you tell me, for a non-journo, non-politician or wannabe politician, what those lessons were? I never understood the being a journalist and being a politician part, apart from words.
I think it's curiosity. There's a rule in journalism, well, what makes a story? Is this worth pursuing? The test is, are you interested in it? Are you, the journalist, interested in uncovering the facts behind this? And if you are, it's an assumption that other people will too, especially if you learn the tricks of writing in an engaging way. And I think that was, when I was a minister and when I was Premier, looking at a script for question time and making a decision to cut this out, to get every redundant word out, to pare the prose back, to minimise content, so I'm always holding the interest of my audience. That reflected the journalistic instincts.
So those honed skills really worked in terms of communication as well, and getting the interest of a crowd.
Yeah, communication is a very, very hard exercise, and even when you've had all that preparation, you still stuff up. But an interest in words, a love of words, and the contours of the English language is not a bad preparation, because Premier or Foreign Minister, you've got to make words work for you. If you had a NATO conference and you're one of 25 foreign ministers who'll be talking through the morning with a time limit of, say, 3 minutes, it's worth the challenge of holding their interest, of delivering, speaking for Australia, delivering something a bit more engaging than the boring
prepared
rote
words.
Yeah, just being read into the record. And I remember the great honour of speaking for Australia on the World War I battlefields on Anzac Day 2013 as Foreign Minister in France to do just that, with a beautiful speech written by my legendary speechwriter Graham Freudenberg, who'd written for Australian Prime Ministers, Hawke, Whitlam, and for Premier Neville Wran, a great speechwriter with a great fondness for history and a feel for Anzac because he had a grandfather who fought there, or father. And you're speaking for Australia, and the sun's coming up over the French countryside, and it's a crisp spring day about to dawn, and you've got a vast audience in front of you, including thousands of Australians who've made this odyssey, and you're getting up there with a short speech about the essence of Anzac by a master craftsman, and your job is to fling your words out there. It's, I think many politicians don't invest in those communication skills. And if you speak well, you're honouring your audience. You're honouring your audience. You're saying that they're important enough to have justified years of preparation and training and attention to detail.
I think that's really an amazing feat, because it's a criticism that can be made easily today when you hear other politicians. But going back to when you were 15, and we're going to get into you entering politics in a moment, what motivated you? What was the driving ambition as a 15-year-old to enter politics of all things?
I think the sense of politics as a noble profession, I had absorbed what we might call Labor mythology from a father and from an uncle, and just begun to read, for example, the biography of Ben Chifley, Labor Prime Minister from 1945 to 1949. And probably a sense, I'd been in one debate. My education was appalling. There was only the occasional opportunities to debate. There's no debating club at the school. Again, undermotivated teachers with no drive or enthusiasm for the most part. But I did enjoy that debate, and I thought it was something, given the chance, I could do well.
And so it was about engagement, and you could do well. Was it to serve people, serve your community? Just the motivation, the why for me is really important.
Yeah, I think to head a government that would be a big reform government, and I was attracted to nation building. I'd accepted the Labor line that the Chifley government had committed to the Snowy Mountain scheme, the building of Qantas as a government-owned airline, the establishment of TAA, the post-war immigration project, the notion of Labor as a nation-building party was what I found heroic and what drew me to the circus of democratic politics.
This gets to my next point. Segues very nicely. And nobody put him there. Nobody put him up to it.
No. I was self-motivated, and I was very conscious that this was the first step in a campaign to project myself into a political career. So it was quite precocious for a 15-year-old.
Well, it's quite extraordinary, Bob. At 15, I mean, I've got a 17-year-old, and at 15, that would be an extraordinary forward-thinking move to nation build. And obviously, you learn a lot of skills along the way, and it was all self-driven, which is fantastic. But then, how did you go with the machinations of Labor politics? Because one thing about, and I've tried and failed, to say you want a nation build and serve the community and project, but it's quite another to actually achieve the feat through the ALP in terms of having support and numbers and factions. Talk us through that a bit.
Yeah, well, I suppose a key decision I made was to join the majority faction, and the consideration that weighed with me was my support for Whitlam. I was a teenage Whitlamite. I was a fan of Whitlam, and I thought that if Whitlam were leader of the Labor Party, he was only deputy leader at the time, we'd have a stronger chance of winning, and it would be a great reformist government. And the right faction was supporting Whitlam, the left was supporting Jim Cairns, a leftist, a former academic, and someone who really wasn't that comfortable about pursuing power and using power, but he saw politics as protest and saw the Labor Party as a protest party. So I was drawn to Whitlam. I wanted to see a strong Labor government, and Whitlam seemed the natural, obvious future Prime Minister, and the right in the party supported him. And I ended up linking with Paul Keating and Laurie Brereton, Leo Macleay, in Young Labor. So Young Labor gave me a conduit to the party leadership. The leadership of the machine, the party secretary, and so on, and put me on an escalator to becoming president of Young Labor. So I was able, in that little subculture, I was able to make a name for myself as I wanted and get experience in chairing a meeting, get experience in holding colleagues together, developing a bit of charm so that your mates would say, yeah, you've got to be the next president, and sticking with you and being able to give decent contributions, debate contributions, arguing against the left at a Young Labor meeting. They're all very basic skills, but there wouldn't have been a better place than Young Labor in which to master them.
Indeed. And what about the other side of it? There was a public speaking, building leadership, the comrade, but also the difficulty in politics, the knifing, the conniving, the playing of games. How did you deal with all that? Because you strike me as someone who is very intellectual, very well read, and very committed to policy. Would that have been a challenge?
Yeah, no, I had setbacks, and the setbacks were very important. I, again, quite precociously aspired to getting a Senate seat. I was in my late 20s, and I was blocked, quite understandably. And then looking at the local landscape, I was impatient, but we had an established federal and a state member who had 2 terms as a minister in Neville Wran's first 2 governments. And I was impatient, but it was the impatience of someone just about to turn 30. The notion of a 30-year-old thinking, oh, I'm 30, I'm going nowhere. I've got friends who are in federal and state parliament, Keating, Brereton. That's where I want to be. That's where I should be. But being forced to wait a bit, to acquire patience and have the opportunity to develop your personality, to extend your skill range, was a true advantage. So I ended up getting into the parliament when I think was 35, into the state parliament.
And state seat of Maroubra, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
And did the party, the machine put you in?
No, absolutely not. I built up the branch myself. I ran interesting branch meetings with guest speakers. They included Malcolm Turnbull, who was a friend of mine. I had him come along and speak to the local Labor Party branch, and built it up. So it was bursting with members, and I was secretary of the branch. So when the vacancy came and the sitting member retired, probably knowing that I was ready to run against him if he didn't, I got the pre-selection unopposed.
Right. Great. Working with Paul Keating and Laurie Brereton, Clay, extraordinary group of people that, I guess, changed the face of Australia in a very positive way.
Yeah,
what was it like working with that group?
Well, it was very interesting. The first thing is they didn't go to university, and that was an advantage. It meant that when we were still living on the campus, with a campus perspective, they were in the workforce with adult males, and they were learning about the real world. And that meant in their early 20s, Keating and Brereton, they were ready just to reach out and grab a federal seat and a state seat. I wouldn't have been mature enough because I was limited by the world of the campus and the ALP club, which I ran at the University of New South Wales. But they had fairly mature political skills in that world of Young Labor, and they were good at reaching out and standing firm when it came to negotiating with senior people in the party. You know, Keating at that age is saying, I'm going for that seat. I can't be stopped. Laurie Brereton the same.
And they bundled through.
Yeah.
A famous story, how Keating got pre-selected on that motorbike
Yep.
and that box. And
That's right.
so one thing I do want, and this is more, it's a Labor insider kind of question. I've always wondered what the Labor right, Labor left dynamics were pre the right wing basically collapsing, in effect, where honour and loyalty to the faction was honoured in the breach, which about the time I kind of came about in 2000 onwards. Maybe it was looking back with in rose-coloured glasses, but was there a time where the faction actually stood, the right Labor right faction stood for something other than careerism?
Yeah, if you're looking at the period I'm talking about as a kid getting drawn into machine politics, pursuing a seat, fighting with the left, it was still the Cold War. And the left of the Labor Party had a large predisposition to Marxism. So there was a strong flavour of neutralism, hostility to the West, a sort of lazy embrace of ideas that were coming out of the Communist Party. Keating with his brutal candour, just said, we're not going to allow the comms, his word for the Labor left, the comms, to take over the party. The other strand was the one that interested me, and it was support for Whitlam instead of Jim Cairns. So that was another defining issue until after Whitlam proved his effectiveness in 1969, winning an enormous number of seats at his first election as leader. There was a broad acceptance that we were close to getting a Labor government and Whitlam was going to deliver it, and the left closed in behind him. The end of the Cold War really meant that there wasn't an ideological fissure anymore, except left opposition to the economic reform agenda of the Hawke and Keating governments. But even that has faded, which leaves us now wondering what any factional division is about, except it seems to be resembling loyalty to your favourite football team.
I'm trying to work out what's the difference between the faction. I can't find any.
Yeah, no, see, the left supports something that I think is very mistaken, and that is the AUKUS agenda. And the left, as a faction, rallied its numbers at the ALP National Conference to prevent any criticism of AUKUS. So they've now got to bear responsibility for the fact that AUKUS looks terribly hollow, a shockingly bad deal for Australia, and one that the American side won't be able to deliver. We're not going to get the Virginia class. It's interesting that the people in the party who've highlighted the vulnerability of AUKUS, me, Keating, Gareth Evans, are being vindicated, but not the left, which went along with it.
Let's go back a little bit to Bob Carr, young politician. What year did you enter Parliament?
1983.
83. Talk me through what was it like at the time to achieve something that you've been planning for 20 years. So you started at 15, you ended at 35.
Yeah, well, the hardest thing about politics, I say this to any young person who might be contemplating a political career, is to get the seat. Disraeli, the great Conservative Prime Minister of Britain, stood 5 times before he got into the House of Commons. Nothing in your political career is likely to be as hard as having to get that seat, especially if it's a safe seat. And they're the seats worth having because you're immunised to the once every 10, 15 years swing against your party. But it's a competitive process. So I felt relieved that I'd got a seat, and I look forward to trading that in for a federal seat down the track. But in any federal pre-selection, competitive as it would be, if you're a sitting state member, you're a credible proposition with name recognition. And boy, oh boy, I went after name recognition, working in the local media and then becoming Minister for Planning and Environment and pursuing the conservation agenda very, very vigorously in the Rann and then the Unsworth government before it was defeated in '88.
And then you became opposition leader after that?
Yeah. And that was pretty tough. Opposition leader up against a new, pristine, generally competent government led by Nick Greiner. Someone on radio, John Stanley, said once, but isn't it true that the leader who takes over after the massive defeat is never around?
He's a temporary leader.
To lead the party into government? And I thought, well, that's a pretty tough assessment. I'll see what I can do.
In your time in politics, you had been around for 20 years in politics. That is a really tough gig. Nick Greiner when he came in '98, was exceptionally popular. Right of centre, just right of centre, a populist, a lot of charm, a lot of suave.
And good on multiculturalism, for example.
Hungarian, his dad owned a factory out at Greenacre. He told me that. And so that would have been, what were you thinking when the secretary knocked on your door and said, do you want to do the job?
Yeah, no, he was very competent, very articulate. He was good at diffusing issues. And he was doing a lot of things that I supported, like selling off the government printing office or privatising the coal loader in Wollongong. I thought these were sensible reforms, shaking up the New South Wales public sector. So it was very challenging to oppose him, but vulnerabilities in his government opened up, and I pursued them like an attack dog and wouldn't let them go.
Take me to Bob Carr, serving Premier, just tripped over the longest serving Labor Premier date, contemplating giving it up. And most people who are involved in Labor politics or politics generally remember when the announcement came out. I certainly do. What were you thinking? What was the matrix of decision making?
Yeah, there is a notion that you get given by the system more or less 10 years. There's been a pattern of people going for, I'm thinking of other states more than New South Wales, going for 6 years, perhaps 8 years. Peter Beattie, I think, was Mike Rann, I think. I pushed it further, went for 10.5. But in politics, that's about what you get if you're Mayor of New York or Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That's about the life you get. Second consideration is that the media can get tired of you. And if you've been successful, some of them get grumpier about that. Well, why has he been so successful? There he goes again. He's diffused that issue. And they start saying, well, we've been tricked by him. I'm thinking, well, look, I'm playing by your rules. I'm trying to explain what I'm doing and to meet your requirements. Otherwise, you'd be saying I'm hopeless at communication. But your very success becomes a reason to grumble about you. And if the media decide, look, he's been there long enough, he disappointed us, he fibbed to us on that occasion, his staff fibbed to us on that occasion, or he's been giving too many stories to the other paper, or he won't do what we're telling him he's got to do on this or that, they can really poison the atmosphere, which is your domain for communication with the public.
The 17 years, so 7 years as opposition leader, and then 10.5 years as Premier. For those who just watch politics now and again, I don't think they realise how gladiatorial it is, how all-consuming it is, the stamina you've got to have to keep up. Is that something that troubled you afterwards, or were you looking forward to having a rest?
No, I thought the so-called stress was a stimulant. your tolerance rises. And people might say to you from time to time, how do you put up with that? You say it's fair. You know, your critics in the media are attacking this public figure called the Honourable Bob Carr. I don't take it personally. That's not me. I'm here. I'm who I am.
That's the stage. That's your stage name.
Yes.
And then, so you left as the most longest-serving Labor and most successful Labor Premier, one would argue. What was the plan? There's one thing about the 10-year rule. What was Bob Carr's plan after that?
I didn't have a plan. The notion of going into federal politics was put to me in the lead up to the 2007 election. Helena would have supported me in that, but I'm not sure I wanted to make that commitment. It was touch and go. I was happy to take it easy. And just focus on self-education and a fitness agenda. Try to get more experience sitting on a board here or giving advice to a corporation there.
And then you found yourself the Foreign Minister of Australia.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, party secretary came into my office and he said, look, we got Makar Bibb retiring from the Senate, so there's a Senate vacancy, and we've got Kevin Rudd, who's quit Julia Gillard's cabinet, so you've got a vacancy for Foreign Minister. I'm going to put to the Prime Minister a plan. Would you go along with it? And it left me feeling very queasy. I discussed it with Helena and ended up agreeing to it, and so it happened.
And how was that different from being Premier? I mean, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, the big difference is that you're in someone else's cabinet.
You weren't the boss.
Yeah, and there's not much you can do in cabinet about the direction of the government, because the direction of the government is taken in meetings between the Prime Minister, the relevant minister, the Prime Minister's staff, and departmental heads. It's not as if cabinet members sitting around that cabinet table say, have got a say in it. And I was dismal about some of the things the government was doing politically, but the cabinet process doesn't give a minister in a different portfolio to really contribute to a policy discussion.
But would you argue that was because you led the state cabinet for so long,
yeah,
as opposition leader or leader, 17 years no less,
yeah,
that's what probably was a struggle? You're no longer, someone else was always in your cabinet, so to speak.
Yeah, so I accepted that pretty quickly, focused on the foreign policy agenda, was restrained by only having 18 months in that job, but shifted our position on Palestine significantly, built our relations with ASEAN. I was very comfortable with my relations with ASEAN foreign ministers, friendships that have lasted to this day. And without raising expectations, got the China relationship, which had been a bit dislodged, back on track, while being cordial with the Obama administration, which was very easy because Hillary Clinton and later John Kerry as Secretary of State were on the same path as we were on key issues.
And was it nice to do? Was it an interesting job?
Yeah, it was. It was. My one regret, 6 years in it, would have been a richer experience, and maybe I should have plunged in 2007.
Can I take you to a more personal issue? And I've known you for a very long time, and I can call Bob just about any time, talk just about anything. And Bob will give me a yes, no answer, or a go away, Talal, or absolutely, I'll talk to you about this. The one time that was sensitive was when I asked how you were doing, and you mentioned Helena, God rest her soul, after she had passed. And he said to me, and I remember the words because I wasn't expecting them, "Can't talk about that now, Talal. Please don't raise it." And that raises the issue of bereavement. And for me, before we get to bereavement, as I was saying to you just before, you're one of the very few, only one, I can't remember, don't even know any other one, relationship where there's a true love story of a leader with his partner. That has been over the 35 years I've been aware of the world. And there's speculation about the relationship and all kinds of things in the media as I was growing up. And about you and about who you were and who Helena was. But the minute you met Helena and yourself together, there was absolutely no doubt. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit that relationship?
Sure. I said in the eulogy, which I thought had to be the speech of my life in St Mary's, that the first time I took her out was to dinner in the Little Dutch Inn in King's Cross, and then a performance of Hamlet on Ice in the Nimrod, what was then the Nimrod Theatre, in the Stables Theatre, right at the Cross. But I then, by way of joking, said the second time was a Labor Party fundraiser at Lane Cove. And
That's probably true.
Yeah, and even in the sadness of the funeral, people laughed at that. She was with me on all those significant public occasions, especially leaving the home on the nights of elections, when the conventional wisdom was that I was going into a bad defeat in 1991, a probable defeat in 1995. But she was with me. And she was with me on so many occasions. Sally Situ, the member for Reed, said she remembers, she must have been a schoolgirl, when Bob and Helena came to a function at the Chinese Laotian temple where she worshipped in Sydney's West. And she thought if Bob and Helena, Premier of the State, and Helena would come to something at our little temple, then there must be something in his side of politics. So bereavement is not something you appreciate till you're plunged into it. But I live with her every day. I think about her last night, walking around. I thought about it this morning, keeping an appointment at Coogee. She dances in the air around me. A complex grief is one where you've been together for 50 years and you're suddenly torn apart. And I think bereavement, I would define bereavement in this way. It's the floundering of the soul and the body when a 50-year partnership is suddenly ruptured with the obliteration of your partner. So the ambulance pulls away from the hotel in Vienna at midnight, and you turn and go back up to the room and you think, this is the rest of my life. She's gone. They've told me a situation is critical. Get over it. Well, it's very hard to get over 50 years of easy association. After a day of, the last 24 hours, a day of wonderful fun, just walking around Vienna, just the routine shared, lovely smiles from her on several occasions I remember to this day.
And if you were to describe her in one sentence, what would it be?
She was a merry presence. Her instinct was to smile, to laugh, to tell a joke. The sparkle in her lambent eyes. Governed by a wonderful common sense approach to life. Sharpened by her business experience, which was formidable, quick understanding. But I remember on that last day, we're only apart for an hour when she dropped me at the local gym. This is in the heart of Vienna. It's a gym not far from the centre of the city. And I did a workout for an hour, and then I came down the steps to go into the change room. She was sitting in the foyer, and she saw me, and her face relaxed into the loveliest, warmest smile. And the smile said, we've been apart for an hour. after spending all the day sort of roaming around the city like kids. And here he is. He's come back to join me as planned, and our fun resumes, the fun of our life together. And at that stage, say that was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she had 8 hours to live. And that smile was a wonderful gift, parting gift to me that I remember to this day.
And if you don't mind saying, or let us know, what happened? Did she have a heart attack?
No, she, after we went to the opera that night and walked back to the hotel, joking and smiling, she was teasing me about how Pavarotti would have sung the role better, and went back to the room. Her first thought was to slice half a banana so I could have that with yogurt as a snack. She went into the bathroom to wash slacks and my socks. And then she came out and she said, "I've got this very strange pain in my back." And she sat on the edge of the bed. And I've since learned from a surgeon that pain in her back was blood from her brain going down the spinal canal following an aneurysm. And then in the next, I guess, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it became, the backache became a headache, and then retching until she fell back in my arms when she was bent over the sink.
God rest her soul. As they say in Islamic religion, you can plan and I can plan, but God is the best of planners. You just don't know what's going to happen. It's an amazing last 24 hours after 50 years.
It was, if the last day had been painted in heaven, it couldn't have been happier. It couldn't have been more cordial and infused with mutual affection.
Sorry for your loss, Bob. I mean, it still resonates, obviously, today.
Yeah.
It's a true love story. It's a true love story over 50 years. Switching, I guess, to more political areas and less personal. And thank you for that. When I got to know you in about 1999, 2000, you've been Premier 3 or 4 years. I was a young Labor member, student president. One of the first things that because I was always listening out for it, given my Lebanese background, was your position on the Middle East. And I then come to learn that Bob Carr, apart from being a great politician, was one of the founders of the Labour Friends of Israel, the key founders in the town hall, I believe. Fast forward maybe 20 years, I may have the dates wrong, maybe 25, Bob Carr is a leading advocate, the most effective advocate for the Palestinian position in this country by a country mile. People, when that happened or started to happen, wondered whether this was a change of heart or change of colour. But I discussed it with you as anything but only just a change of heart. It was a true change in position. But to this day, it's still a mystery to me and others how that position changed so radically. Can you talk me through that?
It was a long-term shift. When we set up Labour Friends of Israel in 1976 or 77, recruiting Bob Hawke for the meeting in the Trades Hall, not the Town Hall, it was the response of a group of people who had no Palestinian friends or acquaintances. So they just weren't a presence. And the notion of a land without a people, for a people without a land, was probably implicit in our thinking. Our ignorance of the Nakba, the expulsion of the Palestinians from their villages and towns, was not something we were conscious of. So we accepted the Zionist Exodus movie interpretation. And it helped that Israel had this social democratic character. As the years passed and Israel became more rightist and more nationalist, a prime minister who wanted peace with the Palestinians being assassinated. And the settlement spreading. I remember saying to Frank Lowy, Frank, how can you say Israel wants to return the West Bank as part of a peace settlement when these settlements seem to be growing? This would have been back in 2000 or so. And he said, don't worry about it, Bob. He said, if the Israeli people get a peace deal, they will give up those settlements. But what continued to happen was a steady increase in the population of settlers, a total of 500,000 being planted strategically, enabling you to draw only one conclusion. The settlements are being placed to stop a Palestinian state ever being created. So it was soon plain to me that the bulk of opinion in Israel will never accept a Palestinian state. The other revelation was that America, for all its interest in making a peace deal, would never force Israel to accept a Palestinian state by threatening Israel the loss of military aid. You'd never get a president of the United States to step over that line. It's one thing to be a bit critical, as Obama was, to vote on the Security Council for the first time to enable a criticism of settlements to get through. Oh, that's fine. But no US administration would do the only thing that counted, penalise Israel by cutting off or reducing military aid, to force it to stop spreading settlements and to accept a Palestinian state. So I reached the view that we're dealing with nationalist, ethno-nationalist politicians running Israel. That's been confirmed in the last, 10 years under Netanyahu. And to turn my attention to the suffering of the occupied West Bank, and now, on a vast scale, of Gaza.
Why wouldn't I agree with your assessment that the US was never sufficiently threatened an Israeli funding of state to get a two-state solution? But I never understood why. Because the clear answer, anybody with an objective analysis, is there will never be security for Israel.
Yeah.
Unless they're Palestinians.
Well, let me be brutal about that. The answer is the role of the Jewish community in America in donating to both sides of politics. Adelson, the former casino owner, was blatant about it. He would give money to Republican candidates for president based on the scale of their commitment. And when Chris Christie, running strongly in Republican primaries, had referred to the occupied West Bank, he was summoned to Las Vegas to be lectured by Adelson that the correct terminology was the disputed territories. So the donors to both sides in American politics from the Jewish community have got enormous influence, and they use their money to run primary challenges to any person in Congress or the Senate who steps out of line. And the challenges could be about quite separate issues, but the challenger will be well funded, and the message will be, if you criticise Israel, we're taking you out. We will fund a primary challenger to run against you. So as a result, that shamelessly corrupt body, the US House of Representatives, will not tolerate a criticism of Israel, even invited Netanyahu to come and address it against the policies of the American president, who was seeking an international agreement with Iran to block its weaponization of nuclear technology. It's unbelievable to think that Netanyahu would be invited as a result of the work of America's Jewish lobby, to the House of Representatives to condemn the government of the United States for seeking a peace deal with Iran on the issue of nuclearization. For a US administration to take on Israel and say, you must accept a Palestinian state, you must dismantle these settlements. They cannot do it.
So how does this end? Where's this
Nobody
going?
knows. The truth is, nobody knows how it ends. But there is the prospect of it ending with something close to the extinction of the Palestinian people. Their homes, their housing has been destroyed. The food has been cut off. They're in danger of being shot dead if they turn up at a food distribution centre, and aid workers are being starved and shot. As you repeat this incontestable evidence, your mind screams out that this cannot be true. But there is Israel, an ally of the United States, a state that Western countries are so reluctant to criticise. There is Israel pursuing a policy that has Palestinian children tear at their mothers' skirts and say, "Where is the food? Where is the food? Why haven't we got any food?" Why this cruelty directed at Palestinian children dying in hospitals? Because there is no food. This is the Warsaw Ghetto. This is comparable with the ghetto.
It is. But no solution with Netanyahu and the US government.
No, it suits Netanyahu to have it continue because his coalition is so fragile and he's dependent on the support of extremists. The sort of people, well, the people who march in a demonstration in Jerusalem with the crowd chanting, "Death to Arabs, death to Arabs." If it had been, imagine a situation where there might have been a demonstration of Arab background people somewhere in this region chanting, "Death to Jews, death to Jews." It would have been on the front page of every paper in the world. It just strikes me that anti-Palestinianism of a murderous variety, a vicious variety, gets no attention because we're captured by the historic freight of anti-Semitism, which has been in our history so malign. But right now, with 50,000 people in Gaza killed and babies dying of starvation, right now, a more malign force in the world is anti-Palestinianism. The desire within Israel to drive this people out.
Yeah, very depressing, Bob. Very depressing. Without a solution in play at this point. Can we move on to a couple of quick-fire questions I like to, on a lighter tone and a less depressing tone, that I like to ask my guests. And there's 3 or 4 of them. They're quick-fire, just general questions. What's the biggest myth or misconception people have about Bob Carr?
Gee, I don't know. A woman came up to me in a cafe this morning when I was grabbing a quick breakfast after a fasting blood test, which made me really hungry, left me really hungry. She came up to me and she said, congratulations for getting us the Olympics without going into debt. And I thought it was lovely. It must have been a response to a little piece that quoted me saying something at my 30th anniversary of my election. But I thought it is funny the things pick up. And on the other hand, at the Sydney Film Festival, a woman walked distance with a finger out like this. I thought, she's accusing me. She said, "I know you." So I said, "Yes, I used to read the news on Channel 7. And she said, "I knew there was a reason I liked you." So I just don't know what is out there.
You've been in public for so long. It's like, what misconception? They're all of them misconception.
Yeah, there's one. I was walking through the street once, and there's a guy, like a bit of staging. He was leaning against a telegraph pole with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. He saw me and he said, "Hey, you're one of them Prime Minister fellas, aren't you?" I should have said, "Well, you're obviously a political scientist from the ANU."
What's Bob Carr's guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure? I think eating chocolate while reading. Eating chocolate while reading.
The two have to go together.
Yeah.
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 Okay. And what's the one thing you can't live without?
Some decent, healthy food, protein-based, lots of vegetables, fruit and yogurt. I was in a hotel in China, and there was a smorgasbord that seemed to be a buffet that seemed to be the same at breakfast as it was at lunch, as it was at dinner. And I really took that very hard.
You need good quality food.
Where are the superfoods I need? The half avocado, the baked sweet potato, the broccoli. I just feel you've got options in life, and at a time when some of my contemporaries are falling over and struggling, you might as well try to get in the right risk category. There are no guarantees that any of these tricks are going to work, but would you rather be in the category of someone who's trying hard, through walking, gym work, trying to eat natural foods instead of highly processed stuff? I mean, you might as well give it a go.
And give it a shot. Last question. In your writings, you generally reflect quite a bit on legacy. You've always had your mind, even at 15, you were thinking about reform and government. If you remembered for one thing, what would you like that to be?
I think the environmental stuff, the environmental agenda, the world's first carbon trading scheme, stopping dolphins being plucked from the ocean and put in dolphinariums, saving coastal wetlands, the 350 new national parks, and protection of wilderness. But I've also been thinking that giving New South Wales a corruption-resistant police force rather than a corruption-prone one probably explains why policing is more effective and community-based today than it had been 30 years ago. But in a sense, people don't tick the boxes. It all gets lost. It all gets merged together. You just become one of them Prime Minister fellows. And you might just leave behind a trail of personality, some vapour in the air. If people regard that vapour as benign, that's probably the most recognition that's going to be around. And then it will settle.
At some stage. Well, thank you very much for your time, Bob.
Pleasure, Talal.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've got something out of this conversation, I encourage you to share it, rate it, or leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. If you're not already subscribed, hit the button on your podcast app or on YouTube at Talal Yassine. We drop episodes every fortnight, each one a deep dive with someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind or stand their ground. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.